Welcome to another episode of The Rabbi and the Therapist. And I personally am extremely pleased today to welcome Joel Yakub with us. Joel and I met in 2009 when his last year in law school essentially helped establish the Chabad synagogue in Manhattan and have not seen each other in years. So this is quite an auspicious reunion for both of us, right?
Definitely.
Okay, that's great. Joel, when he was graduating law school, I asked him, is there anything in particular you're going to specialize in? And he said, yeah, matrimonial law. And my response to him was that he was crazy. But he did it, and apparently is one of the most successful matrimonial attorneys around. And we're going to be asking him some questions about what his experience is like in what you can well imagine to be one of the most difficult things. So,
Dr.
yes.
Bruce, if I may jump in here.
Yeah.
First thing is, Rabbi and the therapist, a lawyer, and the answer is, lawyers have to be psychologists and therapists when they work with their clients for many, many different reasons. We're not going to spend all our time there. And I must say, I don't remember exactly when I met Joel Yakub, but I've had a number of cases that I was involved in, and I must tell you, should you need a lawyer,
He's the one to go to.
You want to go to. But we're here not to talk about
That's a gratuitous plug for him, but okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
We're not looking to talk about that. We're really talk a little bit about some of the psychology around some of the perhaps halacha, as from the rabbi's perspective, and if there's ways that we can all contribute to shalom bayis, bringing families together, which is so very, very important in today's world. So,
well, I think let's start really with something that you had mentioned earlier. You had some rough statistics in your experience on the rising rates of divorce in the religious, particularly the Lubavitch community. And I just wanted you to repeat them because I have a feeling that Joel maybe has a different perspective on that. So, yes,
okay.
Go ahead.
The Orthodox Jewish community today, unfortunately, very sadly to say, it's about 25% divorce rate. Within the Crown Heights community and other places, it's over 15%. I'm going to be kind and say over 15%, and perhaps a little bit better than that, unfortunately. To me, I grew up, when I was growing up 50 years ago, the divorce rate was less than 2%. So to go from 2% to 15% or to 25% is staggering, is frightening, is really bad. Those numbers are they somewhat correct?
I mean, I'm not a statistician. I don't know exactly how the numbers play out, but I think it's very hard for me to look at it from my perspective because I'm obviously seeing only the people who are having the issues. But I would say that I don't know that it's as high as 25%. I definitely don't agree with that statistic. I think a lot of people are at a point where I'll get a lot of consultations where I never hear from the person again. Not because they're not hiring me, but they're just checking in for advice. It turns out to be mostly, frankly, almost marital advice. What to do in this type of situation. And I think that's more speaking to, maybe in prior generations, people didn't seek advice. I also think that a lot of people go into divorce, unfortunately, because of who they're speaking to in their peer group. You definitely see people who you'll hear from a husband or a wife and say, the moment, 3 of the people in our peer group got divorced, it almost became normalized. So when there were issues in the relationship that otherwise maybe they would have worked on, that effort wasn't made and it became, well, maybe there's this other option and I can have this new life. And I usually spend my time telling people how terrible life after divorce probably would be.
Bless you, my friend.
Because,
bless you.
I mean, if you just think about it, first of all, the dating pool, if you look at the rate of I know the rate of divorce on a second marriage is way higher than on a first marriage.
Really?
Definitely, because number one, you're carrying
Almost double.
You're walking into somebody else's trauma and dynamic, right? Everything going on with their kids and how you're able to come in and step in, whether you want that role. Plus, you're talking about a religious family, so it's not one child or two children. It's usually 4, 5, or 6. You've got, unfortunately, in the cases that are religious and litigious, they never seem to fully just put the fight to bed. So you're actually marrying into somebody else's fight, and you're expected to sometimes bankroll it, provide them that support. And I just paint this picture that I always tell people. I have people coming to me and complaining about, the litigation that their spouse is being taken to court. Their spouse got served with a summons. And I'm not sure that the issues, what I often will tell people is, this is sort of to push some reflection, is why do you think it's going to be better with the second person? Unless you're telling me that, they're diagnosed with some very serious mental health disorder, or there's a big difference in your religious observance between the two of you where you're literally incompatible. It's not easy being married. That's just like a fact people forgot about.
Joel, you started off by saying that people call you for advice. I think we're both kind of curious. What kind of advice are they looking for? Is it purely on the level of how their finances will be split up? Or do you find that they sometimes look towards you, or you find yourself kind of in the role of being a mediator, pseudo-therapist?
So, the number one words that come out of their mouths would be, how do I protect myself in this situation, right?
Financially.
It could be financially or in
children,
custody.
Custody.
But usually the right solution focuses on the relationship being healthier, because if you're giving them advice on how to protect themselves when it comes to litigation, that advice, if they act on it, harms their relationship one way or the other, because they're no longer thinking about, themselves as a family unit or as a couple. It's how am I going to do something on my own that's only going to benefit me? And in any scenario, that's not good in a relationship. I'm sure there are very few times in a relationship you can think that way where your relationship comes out better.
I would imagine also it sets up inherently a adversarial state of mind, correct?
Definitely. And I always tell people, my famous thing that I tell my clients is, you don't need to worry about it unless I'm worrying about it. And it takes a lot for me to think that, because the things that drag into people's heads in a relationship, it's petty nonsense. To me, the only thing is like, are kids going to be kidnapped? Is a kid going to be harmed? Is somebody going to literally change all the locks and, move a deed from one person's name to another? If it's not something on that level where it's heavy lifting, it's usually just nonsense from my perspective.
I want to go back to what you started with, because I loved it, and that is that you most of the time tell people, hey, do you think life is going to get better? People sometimes walk into my office and they want to get divorced. And I say, okay, tell me, how is divorce going to solve your problem? And are you just not exchanging one set of problems to another set of problems?
Right.
So my question to you as a divorce lawyer is, do you sometimes say, hey, go back for therapy, try to work on your marriage, or try to keep this family together, because it's simply going to be easier and smarter to do so?
So I'll always ask about whether they're in therapy, if kids are in therapy, the parents are in therapy, because I think the solutions usually lie there first. Again, but then you have cases where it's not something where it's in a person's control, where there is some kind of major intervention. Those cases, obviously, there's not much you can do. But, I also, it's difficult because obviously if you're coming from that perspective of I'm thinking about a particular case right now. And I'll just give this scenario. The wife allegedly has a mental health breakdown, and the husband's, on paper is concerned. I'm going to send her to Israel for a top therapist. She happens to be Israeli, so he says, I'm sending you to your family. She sees a therapist there for 10 weeks. And while she's in Israel, he gets an order of protection listing all the ways she acted bizarre at home. and all of a sudden she's coming home and she can't see the kids.
Wait a second. He took out the order of protection against her
While she's away, ex parte. So you have to think, and when people in the community are saying he worked so hard, I said, hold on a second. If he was there for his wife, why did he take the order of protection? He would have continued on the track of, I want to help this person, part of this, we're doing this together. And I think a lot of times you'll find an issue in the marriage that you're going to ride as the horse to justify why you're getting divorced, because you can't just say, to the world or the community, I'm done, right? So you need an excuse why, for whatever reason, maybe you're going through your own midlife crisis, you're questioning things you've done. I've been a mother forever and I was exploited and I have to go find myself. That's something you hear a lot. Or it's a guy saying, I've just been used, I do everything and I don't get anything out of this. So people are looking for oftentimes the reason to, explain why they want out. But I also will tell people, like, if you need a break or you need to go and explore these things yourself, it's still going to exist even with another person. Now, I'm not saying the concept that some people are more compatible with other people. You definitely have relationships where there isn't a natural compatibility, and I think that does exist. I think there are synergies between people and, energies and all of that. I think that definitely plays a role. But I think that to unwind an entire relationship, a marriage, do all of that with, especially if children are involved, for the potential that you're going to find just something that's a little bit easier, I don't think there are too many things in life that are easy and worthwhile, so to speak. So it's a hard thing to chase.
Your name as a lawyer within the Hasidic community is quite popular, unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
No, well, fortunately for the person who hires him, but unfortunately that has to be divorced. And you juxtapose an Orthodox or a Hasidic family versus a secular family or people who are not Jewish. Wow, the difference in dynamics and the multitude or the level of problems when you're dealing with just 2 children versus 6 children or in-laws and cousins and uncles. And I'm just wondering if you can comment to that.
I always joke that every year I get one non-Jewish client, and it's always when I finish that one non-Jewish case, somehow I just randomly will get a referral for another non-Jewish case. So I always have that exposure. I cannot express how easy a non-Jewish case is or a non-observant case is. Really? You're not fighting about holidays, which are literally almost every month. You're not fighting over style, payas, hair, length of coat, hat, where they're davening, whether the last name changes on remarriage, how far you're going to move on remarriage. Parenting time in a non-Jewish case is almost always 50-50. Most people, it's just very, very normal. Fortunately, unfortunately, in the Jewish community, there's so much entrepreneurship because people don't take traditional paths. So imagine trying to figure out child support and somebody's income when they're self-employed with all the deductions and all the cash businesses versus 90% of these cases are W-2 earners. You just plug in their income, you have child support, spousal support, statutorily figured out, and they're just not as invested in fighting over, literally, I always say to them, so do we need a Easter schedule? They don't even ask for an Easter schedule. It's usually Thanksgiving and winter break. Those are the two things. Did
you have to, now specifically talking about an Orthodox or Hasidic couple, did you have to study or deepen your understanding of Jewish or halachic law that the couples bring in with them? And I guess I'm wondering, sort of, how do you negotiate between what you do and a Beit Din, because obviously they want to get as well, correct?
Well, I would say a lot of times my practice is doing both appearances at the same time. So I'll be in the Beit Din and I'll be in court. Or, my very first custody trial was in front of a Beit Din. Really? So I've had a lot of exposure there. I would say, all my clients were Orthodox, vast majority Hasidic. So very quickly I figured out and I knew what the norms in the community is. I mean, to the point where I'll have somebody come in, a guy will come in and say, I want 50-50. And I'll look at him and say, nobody in your community asks for 50-50. What's going on? There must be another reason. And he'll explain, my wife is suicidal, my wife is on these medications, I've been doing everything, this is, so right away it's an outlier from the community. But yeah, I mean, it just very quick learning curve from the get-go.
So let's get to the main meat and potatoes from my perspective, and I spoke to Dr. Bruce about this before. And besides from the fact that you have to be a therapist and a psychiatrist in doing the work that you do, let's talk about mediation versus actually going to court and some of the benefits, and can it work? Because one of the things that people have said within the Orthodox and Hasidic community is, well, the woman's not going to get a fair shake in mediation or in Besdin, and therefore we have gone to secular court. My question is, you said your first case you actually argued in a Besdin, so which is some form of mediation. But I even like not a question of mediation, but really if it's non-binding mediation, we're simply sitting with a person, and you know that there are people within the Orthodox community, sometimes under the name Rabbi or sometimes just under business people, who have really inserted themselves as people who are trying to do it for really chesed. And I'm just wondering what you think about that and what your advice could be to people who are listening to us.
If I'm not sending you to therapy, I'm definitely sending you to mediator first if you don't need immediate help. I mean, because it's just not worth any of the time, any of the money. I would also point out that I think mediation works very well as long as somebody doesn't have fight that they need to get out of them. I mean, you could go and say, here's what I think is a fair settlement. Somebody rejects it, and they will burn money, time, they'll go through all the mud of a case for 2 years when everyone's emotionally drained and their money's low, and that's almost always that initial offer is what you end up with as a settlement. I mean, the number of cases where this was, and I almost laughed to the judge. I said, Judge, that was my offer the first day. But they had to get it out of them. They had to have their, and sometimes it's not, the other difficulty in the community is sometimes the fights in a father-in-law or some other family member who's hijacked the litigation. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's sitting in the rabbi advisor, none in Crown Heights, by the way. I'm thinking in other communities.
I'm very much with you. You know that.
Yeah, you'll have people who are orchestrating these fights. And, they're making money because they're getting some kind of advisory fee or whatever. And I think people get pushed into that trap. But if you boil it down, and I always tell this to people, if you're on the same page when it comes to what school your kid's going to, which to me also encompasses religiousness, because if you're okay with the school, you're okay with the religious makeup of the school and what that carries, then fighting over that extra day or sleepover is not worth it. It's not worth it, because the amount of damage you're doing to the kid, to your own life, putting it on hold, it's not worth it. Plus, once the other side is over it and everything normalizes, they'll most likely be okay with it in the future when their life moves on. Because I always tell people, don't fight for what you want right now. Fight for what you think you're going to want in the future. Because, yeah, you want all this visitation right now. What if you remarry a lady or a guy with 2-3 kids, and you guys don't have any time together, and your kids are sitting in your house 5 days of the week? You have no time to build a relationship with your new spouse. So don't take on more than you can actually handle or that you're going to want to. And if I told you I could give you your dream new spouse tomorrow, what's the life you'd build with them? And what's the settlement that would work best with that life? Because if you're not looking in that, then you're in such a pigeonhole that you're fighting over the things that you're not even going to want in the future.
You mentioned about the children, and I think I'd like to hear from the doctor as well as from the lawyer. What we're putting our kids through, that that trauma that they're putting them through, or sometimes I think it's a little bit of torture, or either through what they call forensic evaluations, or schlepping them to court. What about that damage, and how do you speak to that when you speak to your client?
I think when I started out, it wasn't at the forefront of my mind, but it's almost as I've practiced for more time. A lot of my clients are the children of divorced households. That is probably the majority of my clients.
Wow.
So you're seeing the pattern, You also will have something where you help the client and they're calling you because they're having major issues with a child, and that this is all triggered by this traumatic experience that, they were put through in terms of the divorce, whether they sat with a judge, sat with an attorney. Like, people can't even understand what type of impact that would have on a kid, moving forward. Now, I think some kids definitely get past it. And I'm not saying that you're cursed because you come from a divorced household. Although I think when you look at the shidduch system, if you're from a divorced household, you're going to be married to somebody from a divorced household, or sometimes worse, with some other issue. It's definitely a stain in the community, unfortunately, that you have to understand you're putting your kids through. And it affects everything in the Jewish community. All the way, forget your life, you're literally, and I'll have clients who will be calling me all the time. I have one client who every single month has to come in for almost a pep talk, it's really more of a therapy session. I now practically know her spouse because I intervene and I say, listen, let's do this. And all we're trying to do is get all of their children married. And then they're going to sit down and deal with everything, because they know that it's going to be very hard to find the shidduch for their kids once they're divorced, once that's out there. So they will keep this under the wraps for as long as they can, and I'm just literally putting out the small fires until that point, because they know it does damage, in a very, very real way. Never mind, I don't know the all the research that I'm sure exists in terms of if a parent is removed from your life, which oftentimes in a messy divorce, somebody comes in with allegations, think of an order of protection, whatever it is. All of a sudden you're seeing your spouse, your parent in a very restricted setting. All these things have so much impact that I think I definitely didn't appreciate it early on. But now, having my own kids, I can't even imagine if for a month, which you have to imagine, we're in Kings County, right, Brooklyn. You get an order of protection put against you, they don't have time to hear your case for a month, 2 months. The amount of time between is so much time, and you're seeing your parent for now 1 hour a week. And, I always go back to, I was in law school, and this goes to a lot of my child services cases that I do. I was in a family law clinic, and on the last day, we were told we had a special speaker, and the professor called somebody from the class to stand up. And it was one of our classmates who had gone through the foster care system. And she said, if you had gone back and looked at what my parents did to me that got them removed, it's the same stuff we write about for orders of protection, whatever it may be, corporal punishment, missing school. I mean, they're different varying levels, and I'm not saying this applies to all. And she said, I would have traded being in a foster home any day to be back with my parents because of how bad it was and how damaging it was for me to be away from that kind of family unit. So I think when people go and do whatever that they're planning to do, I think they have to think about just what would happen if a kid just all of a sudden, a parent's just like snap of a finger, they're not existing in their life. Right. I mean, it's crazy. And that's why in this case that I gave you the example of, everybody who comes to me, because it's a Jewish case, so you have the whole community contacting you, have former clients contacting you, why are you being so hard on him? He's such a good guy. I said, you can't justify it to me he took the mother from the kids. If he really cared, he would have done this in a way where, okay, you know what, you want to come home, let's make sure everything is settled, let's engage this person or that person. But he went the nuclear route, which only lasts so long, and the damage is just incredible.
I don't want to touch that. That was beautiful.
Yeah, it was beautiful, and I bless you that you continue to help people, hopefully bringing shalom bayis, people getting back together, but most of all, I know you're a strong advocate for the kids, for the children, and that is what makes you different than some of the other lawyers. And I will continue to give your name out to people who need you, but I'll always tell them, try mediation, because like you said, at the end, they got the exact what they were going to get in the beginning. Right. And a lawyer taught me that 40 years ago and said, we know as lawyers usually where it's going to end up. We can go direct there or figure out how much money we can schlep from people or how much kishkish we can schlep. And that's why you're different than many of the other lawyers. And I'm very thankful, and I'm thankful that you came to join us for our,
Thank you.
For our program.
Pleasure, honor.
Yeah.
Nice to see you.
Yeah, I know. We'll have to wait another 16 years. And thank you for joining us for another episode of The Rabbi and the Therapist. And one more thank you to Joel Yakub, who was very generous with this time in sharing his experiences and his thoughts. If you have any questions or comments, our email address is down below. And till the next time.